In keeping with the trend of times and the desire to offer our listeners a complete coverage of the European situation, KFWB takes great pleasure in presenting Mr. Robert Arden, your foreign correspondent, each Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 7:15 p.m. A distinguished newspaperman, author, and linguist, Mr. Arden brings you his original and exclusive comments of the foreign situation, a background in vivid colors against which future events are projected. He brings the world right into your home. And now, Mr. Robert Arden, your foreign correspondent.
Thank you, Gil Warren, and good evening, everybody. Tonight, instead of making my customary comments on the current events, I'd like to take you on a short excursion into the past. There is a great deal of valuable information written on the pages of history, and by scanning it carefully, we find very often understanding for the present. And for the future, in the light of the past, we see that it loses its dark and fearsome mantle of mystery. Well, let's turn back the pages.
1932, President Roosevelt elected.
No, go a little back further.
1918, armistice concludes World War.
No, still farther.
1912, Panama Canal open to shipping.
Not enough yet. Go on.
1900, World Exposition.
No, a little more.
1880.
It is in the sacristy of its Catholic Church. He's bending low over a heavy leather-bound volume which bears the gilded inscription, Vital Statistics. His hand is shaky and his fingers tremble as they try to hold the quill steady. He writes, April 20, 1889. Born, a son, to her customs inspector Franz Schickelgruber and his wife, Maria Hitler. Thus, exactly 51 years ago today, fate selected the obscure little border town in Upper Austria and the hands of an aged Catholic priest to write the first chapter of a story which we, 100 years later, are only beginning to experience. A story of overcompensation triumphant over innate mediocrity. The story of an insatiable ego striving night and day to believe that it alone was the umbilical cord linking it to the contemporary world and to the unborn destiny. The last hope of the lost generation of disinherited youth. In short, the first chapter of the story of a man who in 13 years talked into being a movement such as even Germany never saw before. The story of Adolf Hitler. The son of a minor customs official, Adolf, the youth, was stubborn, impertinent, and a show-off. He was slated to follow in his father's footsteps and thus was sent to the provincial schools. Ludwig Pertsch, a professor of history on an intermediary school in Linz, soon exerted great influence over the growing child who, quickly absorbing the teachings of the pro-German teacher, turned into a fanatical patriot. Not for his own country, Austria, but for Germany. Geography attracted Hitler's attention and he began to draw maps. From that modest beginning, he began to draw landscapes and houses, drawings which showed early a certain talent. He next turned to music and became inflamed by Wagner's Lohengrin, and that to such an extent that he decided to become an abbot. Then suddenly disaster struck. Both his parents died, and at the tender age of 17, we find young Hitler on his way to the capital, Vienna. A roll of drawings under his arm and 50 crowns, about $10 in his pocket, he wanted to break into the ranks of the students of Vienna's famed art academy. His drawings were refused by the dean with the remark that they showed more talent for the career as an architect than that of a painter. But since Adolf had not even finished intermediary school, what chance did he have to embark upon the costly and difficult career of an architect? His 50 crowns were quickly spent, and now he was facing the necessity of earning his own living by doing odd jobs at manual labor. He, the son of a government official. This was a blow which he never forgot nor forgave. He had to live among Vienna's working men, and his life became an acute case of suffering. The workers expected him to join a trade union. When he refused, they made him the butt of their jokes and pushed him off scaffolds. Then they boycotted him or refused downright to work with this scab at all. Of course, to Hitler, the idea of joining laborers in a trade union was preposterous. He, the son of a government official, could not possibly be associated with such scum, and besides, did they really expect him to remain a laborer forever? He tried to argue with them, but to his horror he found that his romantic patriotism was jeered at by those class-conscious proletarians. Are these really human beings, he asked himself? Are they worthy to belong to a great people such as the German nation? Even then, it never occurred to Hitler that they, in their interpretation of events and rights, might be just as right as he was. But he preferred to refuse indignantly to join their union, although it meant less employment for him. While in Vienna, Hitler soon began to take an interest in the Reichstag, the Austrian parliament. There, apparently, he found confirmation of his doubts. Austria-Hungary, the political union into which he was born, was not a genuine German state. Foreign majority was allowed to raise its voice and even to influence the policies of the empire. The Habsburg monarchy, to Hitler, who worshipped the traditions of the great Kurfürst and the Prussian kings, that monarchy was only a rotten mosaic of mostly inferior peoples. He had been taught that the belief in majority rule demolishes the sublime idea of leadership. Once his attention was awake, he followed it up by reading a great deal and mostly books whose contents he could not possibly understand. Unwittingly, and again entirely by misconception, Hitler's attention was first directed upon the Jews. In Vienna at the time, Karl Lueger was a mayor who followed a time-honored political concept of anti-Semitism in order to achieve a certain notoriety. But that was done entirely for political reasons, for in his private lives the good mayor cultivated mostly Jewish friends. But how could Hitler know anything about the mayor's private life? He heard only the public utterances of anti-Semitism, and soon he began to consider the members of that ancient faith as the clue to the whole contemporary social system. He found out that Austria's upper classes showed a decided preference for England and France, and even attacked the holy person of the German Kaiser for purely political reasons. But even though he may have understood those reasons as a native Austrian, he still considered it a crime, since the German Kaiser was the creator of a powerful German navy, and as such, Hitler's adored idol. The Viennese also laughed good-humoredly at his Bavarian dialect and his provincial ways, and thus Hitler became an enraged anti-Semite, a fighter for racial discrimination. After 5 years of unhappy existence, the youngster left Vienna. Mankind has become great in everlasting struggle, he wrote at the time, and everlasting peace would only lead it to decay. From this time on, he thought himself qualified to talk on almost any subject, express a so-called opinion, even when he was thoroughly lacking in originality. Later, he found little worth adding to his preconceived ideas, and nothing to change in the opinions he had formed as an embittered youth. It is now 1912. And Adolf Hitler is in Munich. 2 years he lived there as a bohemian, waiting for the glory to come, while decrying his unhappy fate of not having been born 100 years sooner, in the time when Europe was fighting Napoleon. When in 1914 the World War came, Hitler fell to his knees and thanked God. He enlisted. The army became the home which he had lost since the death of his parents. He was 4 years on the Western Front, serving in the List Regiment of the Royal Bavarian Infantry. As a soldier, he made some progress. He first became battle orderly, was decorated, and after he was wounded for the second time, he was made a corporal. During his service in the army, he kept his supreme self-determination. He dramatized himself into the solitary, misunderstood patriot who refused even to accept food or other gifts which his comrades received from their homes. And he utterly avoided women. The German collapse found him still nothing but a lowly corporal, just recovering from a gas attack in a hospital near Berlin. He almost lost his sight, and when he heard of Germany's defeat, he wept hysterically. As soon as he was able to leave, he went south again and swore that he would become a politician. First, he listened to what people were saying. Then, when he found a general wave of discontent, he quickly decided to ride in on that wave and began to blame the Jews for Germany's defeat and the subsequent misery. The Aryan is the original type of what we call mankind, he said. The Negro is a half-ape, and German culture, like all cultures, must perish through bad blood mixtures. That he wrote and said all the time. He kept on talking, and with his natural eloquence and an innate showmanship, he soon developed into a most effective speaker. The question often asked here is, did or does Hitler actually believe what he said or advocated? Well, I think so. Hitler is sincere even in his most flagrant contradictions, for his half-baked mind is humorless, and coupled with the strongly neurotic conditions, it does not require consistency of thought or its tireless research for truth, which so often distress the more intellectual type of thinker and philosopher. Hitler is no philosopher, and he is no thinker. He is, in thought, speech, and deed, a usurper. What others thought, he appropriates and distorts it for his own purposes. And with almost hysterical fanaticism, he repeats it so long until he himself believes it. He cannot write, he does not think. He just gropes about till he finds a well-worn word path and then slides into an oration. In 1923, Hitler, already well known as a politician, met General Ludendorff, the former aide to Field Marshal Hindenburg. Together they planned a putsch, but in their haste and burning optimism, they overlooked the most important factor, an adequate military force which alone could bring and ensure success. Hitler, meeting with a number of followers, began shooting a revolver into the ceiling of a beer cellar in Munich. When the Reichswehr troops of Governor von Kahr came to restore order, Hitler threw himself so violently onto the stones of the street that he broke his shoulder. Lord Davenant, British ambassador at that time in Berlin, reported, Hitler's courage was unequal to the occasion. Before a court, which was fearful that the accused might implicate a lot of prominent people, lest he was given certain considerations, sentenced Hitler to 5 years in a fortress, a sentence of which he actually served 8 months. But his prison term was actually a welcome hospitality on the part of the government, for Hitler had no expenses in the Landsberg fortress. He could finish his Bible, characteristically called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Once the book was finished and money started rolling in, he was discharged. Returned to Munich, his aims were the elimination of Marxist socialism, the restoration of autocracy in Germany, and the destruction of the Jews. No more, no less. He joined an anti-revolutionary group of 6 men, himself being the 7th. That group did not attempt to oppose the Bavarian Bolsheviks until their short reign was ended. Then the German National Labor Party was proclaimed and readied for action. There was an engineer in that group, a certain Gottfried Feder, who gave Hitler all the economic doctrine he needed. But his real teacher was a strange, drunken genius named Dietrich Eckart. This man had translated Ibsen's plays and was a brilliant conversationalist. When stimulated by alcohol or morphine, he could talk with the subtlety of a sage. Yet he, as all others of the Munich group, had one sore spot, the Jews. They wanted an all-powerful Germany which could dominate all others. And this philosophy he pounded into the brain of his youthful followers, and it remained indelibly engraved in Hitler's. Hitler began to speak in public. He talked of biology, higher politics, the Treaty of Versailles, and the weary population let down by the social democratic politicians who were excellent in an opposition party, but a miserable failure as a government, flocked into the arms of the new party. At that time, a sharp-nosed, dwarf-like man made his first appearance, Joseph Goebbels. He began to beat the drums of publicity and lured the younger element to Hitler's oratorical offerings. Those youngsters willingly embraced the new doctrine, since they could find no place in the economic world into which they were so untimely born, and they listened willingly to Hitler's speeches against war treaties, the Dawes and Young plans, his outbursts against German slavery, and the promise of a coming Third Reich, the incarnation of the pan-Germanic dream. In September 1930, the Reichstag elections brought Hitler's party 107 seats and made it with one swoop the Reich's second largest political party. But the Nazis really got into complete power through the betrayal of the German Republic by President Hindenburg, who, much as King Victor Emmanuel of Italy, let in the fascist minority, opened the doors to the Nazis. Then they rushed in on a wave of blood with a sadism beyond anything imaginable. The rest is well-known history. Today, Nazism has set itself up as the ruler of the world, the old world at least, and defies all civilization with its ruthless intolerance. It has grown far beyond a national German issue. It has become a monster that threatens the whole civilized world. And the creator of this political Frankenstein today celebrated his 51st birthday, while millions of widows mourned their slaughtered husbands, while countless orphans waited in vain for their fathers and brothers, while millions homeless wanderers err through a world which has made the greatest progress mankind has ever known, but has no shelter for the harassed and no peace for the weary. I wonder what the old priest would have done had he been able to see 50 years ahead. Good night.
You have just heard the original comments of Mr. Robert Arden, your foreign correspondent on the European situation. He returns to you next Tuesday evening at the same time, same station. If there is any question you would like to have answered, any detail you would like to know, drop a line to Mr. Arden in care of this station in any language at any time. You will receive a prompt reply. This program originates in the Warner Brothers Studios in Hollywood.
KFWB, the third most...